Hey y'all, my name's Rory Gerberg. I used to focus on campus sexual assault and was working on Harvard's policies and procedures and trainings while I was there at HKS through 2015, and then did some research and did a brief time at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division in the Educational Opportunities section, enforcing Title IX from a federal standpoint. And now I work on workplace sexual harassment, which is unfortunately why I won't be able to join you during your actual time today because I have to run to a training. I'm in a conference room at a company as we speak, as you listen to this. So really wish I could be there with you, but really wanted to send some of the kind of things that I was thinking about or that I'd love to pass on and add to all of the fantastic information and insights that Mary Rose has already shared with you. The two questions I want to answer, which came up in previous conversations you've had, are in relation to having the conversation in a way that's engaging people and also how to deal with orientation. So first, having the conversation in a way that's engaging people. There was a current theme that people seem to be having conversations about what isn't acceptable behavior, including men, but they're not really showing up. And so how do we engage them? Yes, this is huge. This is a huge question, and is really something that I struggled with and evolved on in how I work on this issue. I originally worked on it as we were doing an affirmative consent campaign and getting signatures, and in that context, we had this framework of it's very clear of what isn't acceptable, and either you're with us or against us. And what I found in my time there is that while based on David Lisak's work and research of repeat perpetrators, yes, there are certain individuals that engage in criminal-like activity that do require a harsh response. And there is also a wide range of gray area harassment that is actually part of our normalized lived experience. We all know that from our own lived experience. And that is an area where it really requires a much more nuanced and open conversation. And the way that I've really come to see it is that we all are bringing in our lived experience. All of our colleagues at Harvard grew up in this country where there is no sex education teaching us how to navigate sexual boundaries in a respectful way. That's filled in with violent pornography. And surprise, surprise, we have this campus sexual assault epidemic. And then those folks graduate, and surprise, surprise, there are challenges with workplace sexual harassment, which is why I'm here. So this is really part of a trajectory of our lived experience, and that's where there is room for spaces when we look at prevention and how we focus on how to prevent these things from happening. That really requires us to change the stance, response, and when we're looking at supporting survivors and having mechanisms that support survivors, that's where we might take something that's more clear cut. But the prevention space really needs to engage people from very different lived experiences. So my first recommendation is, as you're doing your advocacy, examine your formal and informal authority and ask what you can actually influence. What school are you at? What programs are you at? How long will you be there? What can you actually impact as you're there? What I realized doing the affirmative consent campaign is we were targeting the university, but in reality, our influence was really based with our student population. And that's what led me to move into training and look at how do we have this conversation with our peers. In terms of having that conversation with our peers, I have 3 recommendations of how to engage people in a way that might help get people in the room and also get them listening in a different way. The first is acknowledge where there isn't clarity and where it is ambiguous and where it's difficult. Both acknowledge what you do know and what you don't know. When the reality is people have a lot of questions about what is unclear. And when we express this as if it's so clear, it can intimidate and scare people away from entering the conversation and asking really important questions. And so rather than engaging, they just walk away from you or never show up in the room. So being okay with acknowledging those limitations. Two is framing the conversation about men. This is about masculinity at the end of the day. Though statistically speaking, men are much more likely to be the ones engaging in this action. And since my advocacy at Harvard, I've really learned just so much about how some of my male peers have learned what it means to be a man, and how obviously sexualizing women is attached to that, and really engaging within curiosity and how threats to that relate to sexual harassment is kind of a new way of having the conversation in a way that is curious, and actually there's a lot of learning for everyone. And the third, so first, acknowledging ambiguity; second, framing it as about men; and third, holding our lived experience and recognizing how we carry it. And there's a lot of healing that I didn't recognize in myself, to be honest. I came as an activist, and what I later came to appreciate is that part of what I was carrying when I was speaking so strongly about the statistics of what we know between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 in women in undergraduate are sexually assaulted, and these are real. And in addition, the vigor that I brought with that, and what made it hard for me to listen to the other lived experience, was the way that my own body held that trauma, and even the way that we hold a sense of corporal safety. And it's really difficult to hold that. And I think that there are really spaces that we need for healing and just connecting with other people that can see and hear and understand and hold that lived experience. There's a lot of research on neurobiology and the way that our bodies hold trauma. Really recommend anyone looking at Bessel van der Kolk, who is a fascinating research on the nature of trauma and how it's stored in our body. Leave it at that. Lastly, the second big point is, or different topic, is orientation programming. So students I'm just reading and that a conversation about students saying the challenges around orientation programming and challenges with it. I have 3 recommendations on that. So overall, your first context of what I did while I was there, I worked with Sarah Wald, who's the Title IX coordinator at HKS, providing high-level recommendations for how some of the facilitators be selected and recommendations for how it be run. I then sat in on one of the sessions during orientation and spoke up twice unplanned, but it actually had a pretty big impact, and inadvertently that ended up being how a number of students got involved with our group on campus sexual harassment and assault because of the conversation that started there. My recommendations are, first, there's actually a lot of limitations on what you can do legally based on what I've seen from the Department of Justice side of things. There are just a lot of requirements that schools have to cover in those trainings. They are about legal compliance, unfortunately. This is part of the failure of the legal compliance system. What to do about that is, my recommendation would be, seeing if there's a cohort of MPPs or of students who are able to be trained and be sitting in on those orientation trainings, because what it does is it provides a really powerful message to students about what current students think of acceptable behavior. And really from the get-go, from when they enter the door, it's a strong voice of existing students talking about what is acceptable norms. My second recommendation is implementing, pushing for additional Me Too trainings. So the reality is, compliance requires too much to have the conversation that's really needed about what we do in these areas of ambiguity, as well as understanding it from a behavioral lens rather than a legal lens. Legally, behaviors need to pass a certain threshold of severity or persistence or pervasiveness in order to be illegal or in violation of the school's policy. We want to prevent one instance of sexual harassment of occurring, and that can't be done in a legal training. So push for Me Too trainings that really meet people where they're at in their lived experience. And lastly, for that second recommendation, that a Me Too training, it does actually require a new framework and a level of expertise that, as I saw you've already observed, doesn't necessarily exist in-house. And so collaborate with professors and research institutions, and go beyond the university to see what else is out there. I'd definitely be open to looking at future collaborations. Obviously, this is stuff I'm super psyched about, and I love that y'all are really mobilizing and doing this new. So I'm a resource. Really excited to see what y'all are doing, and really hope that some of these reflections are helpful for as you think through what makes sense on your end given where you're at. So good luck, and hope to talk with some of you soon. Cheers.